Good evening and welcome to Understanding the Trafficking of Children. This is the second webinar in a four-part series presented by the Baltimore County Human Trafficking Work Group. This second webinar will be focused on the realities of child sex trafficking, who it impacts, and how to stop it. I would also like to add that we had about 250 registrations for our first webinar and over 250 for this one, and we are all in the Baltimore County Human Trafficking Work Group. We're thrilled about the community's interests. So thank you for everyone joining us tonight. On behalf of the Baltimore County Human Trafficking Work Group, I would like to sincerely thank all of our partners who have helped to make this public awareness project a reality. Members of each of these agencies comprise the Baltimore County Human Trafficking Work Group and take a collaborative, victim-centered approach to address and respond to human trafficking in our county. It is now my honor to welcome and introduce our Baltimore County Chief of Police to provide opening remarks. Welcome and thank you for joining us, Chief Melissa Hyatt.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation to be here tonight. It's an honor to be here with all of you this evening. First, it's important that you all know that the Baltimore County Police Department is committed to relentlessly doing our part in conjunction with our partners to reduce and hopefully one day put an end to human trafficking. To be successful, we all need to work together. We need to educate our neighbors, our friends, our families, our coworkers, and all of our communities to improve our response to incidents of human trafficking, and we need to use the best practices available. I am very proud to say that our police department has been involved with the Baltimore County Human Trafficking Work Group since its inception. One of the many successes of the work group has been the development of best practice protocols for victims from our first contact with them, including that moment when they first arrive at a hospital. The GBMC SAFE program, and I really have to stop for just a second to just say how incredible the team is at GBMC. Their passion and commitment is unrivaled as it pertains to sexual assault victims. The SAFE program brings together the police, the Baltimore County State's Attorney's Office, local universities, and many other key service providers. The collaborative nature of this program ensures not only that the victims' needs are met, but that the victims are also treated with the compassion, respect, and dignity that they deserve. Collectively, we will all work together to do everything that we can to bring those who commit these horrific crimes to justice. And equally, or maybe even more importantly, is the obligation that we have to provide essential services and support to the victims of human trafficking. Tragically, as many of you likely already know, human trafficking is a crime that often goes unreported. Illuminating this heartbreaking underreported issue can often best be accomplished through tools like public awareness and education. So forums like this four-part series play a significant role in raising awareness and combating this crime. Tonight's session with the topic of trafficking of children really means that awareness and education are even more important. I am certain that each of you will leave from tonight's session equipped with new tools and valuable information. But you might walk out and you might wonder, what more can I personally do to help combat human trafficking? Continue the dialogue, stay informed, and continue to educate those around you. We are all partners in this work, and we will continue to collaborate with all of our stakeholders. Our collective efforts really are making a difference in Baltimore County and across the region. Enjoy the session, and thank you for the invitation to be here tonight.
Thank you very much, Chief Hyatt, for those remarks and for the collaboration with the Baltimore County Police Department. Your agency is such an important piece in the work that we all do. So we thank you. And we thank all of your officers for the dedication and the hard work in combating this crime. This webinar series will continue next month on March 23rd and will conclude in April with a panel discussion led by the county's leading subject matter experts. Please try and join us for our future webinars. A few housekeeping items before we start. All attendees will be muted to ensure sound quality. I would like to take a moment to give another huge thank you to Pilar Zimmer for providing the Spanish translation. If you would like to listen to this webinar in Spanish, please click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen and choose that option.
Si desea escuchar este seminario web en español, haga clic en el botón Interpretación en la parte inferior de la pantalla y elija la opción en español para obtener la mejor calidad de sonido. Haga clic también en Silenciar audio original si está eligiendo esta opción.
Please utilize the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions, which can be sent anonymously. We will have a question and answer segment following the presentation, and we'll also be answering questions live during the webinar, so keep an eye on that Q&A box. For those that have submitted questions in advance, we will answer all appropriate questions during the series. I would like to mention that any questions related to specific organizational procedures may or may not be answered. There are some what you might call trade secrets that are not appropriate to release to the public, and this may include questions related to investigative tactics, for example. An evaluation will be available following the session, and we would appreciate any feedback you would like to share. Lastly, this webinar will be recorded and archived on the Baltimore County Human Trafficking Workgroup's website for future viewing. If you missed our first webinar, The Truth About Trafficking, which was an introduction on human trafficking, you can access that recording on our website at any time. Due to the subject matter of this session, we would like to share a disclaimer. This session is not intended for children and may be triggering to some attendees. Please feel free to leave this presentation at any time. If you do need assistance, please contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline 24 hours a day by calling 1-888-3737-888 or texting BeFree, which is 233-733. We have some amazing presenters for this webinar, and it is my privilege to now introduce each of them. My name is Ashley Macri, and I co-chair the Baltimore County Human Trafficking Workgroup, and I will be moderating this session. Amanda Rodriguez is a graduate of the University of Maryland, College Park, and the University of Baltimore School of Law. Ms. Rodriguez brings a wealth of experience as a former state and federal prosecutor and a member of the Maryland Human Trafficking Task Force for over 10 years. She has also served on the Maryland Commission for Women, the Baltimore County Commission for Women, and the Governor's Family Violence Council. For her tireless efforts on behalf of survivors, she has been recognized with 2 governor citations, a Baltimore County Special Citation, and a Daily Record Maryland Leading Women Award. More recently, Ms. Rodriguez served as the Chief Counsel for Policy and Legal Advocacy at the University of Maryland Safe Center for Human Trafficking Survivors. Currently, Ms. Rodriguez is the co-chair of the Legislative Subcommittee for the Maryland Human Trafficking Task Force and serves as the Executive Director of Turnaround, Inc., a Baltimore County and city-based nonprofit that provides counseling and supportive services to victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, and sex trafficking. Liz Kimball is a DMV native. Liz has been working in the anti-trafficking field for 9 years, as well as other fields, including domestic violence and working with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. However, working with those who've been exploited has always been her passion. Liz has worked with numerous nonprofits in the field and is currently the program director for the fledgling nonprofit Karana Rising. Karana Rising seeks to meet survivors of exploitation and sexual assault and create space for economic freedom through skill building and community. Michelle Delovich is a licensed clinical social worker in Maryland and works in the Baltimore County Child Advocacy Center. Michelle has been in the field of child abuse investigation and advocacy for over 10 years, with a focus on child sexual abuse investigations and forensic interviewing. She is trained in multiple forensic interviewing models, trauma-focused therapeutic modalities, and family-centered practices. Michelle currently supervises Child Protective Services social workers who investigate child sexual abuse and child trafficking in collaboration with the Baltimore County Police Crimes Against Children Unit and other local multidisciplinary partners. She also leads therapeutic groups for survivors of sexual abuse and their families. Dr. Michael Ford will be joining us during the Q&A segment to answer questions related to the school system and safety in Baltimore County Public Schools. Dr. Ford currently serves as the manager of school safety in the Baltimore County Public School System. His current duties include emergency management, gang prevention, human trafficking awareness and prevention, active assailant training, and is one of the BCPS liaisons to local law enforcement agencies. Prior to his current job, Dr. Ford served as the school safety specialist for the Maryland State Department of Education and liaison to the Maryland Center for School Safety, where he managed tasks such as bullying, gangs, emergency planning, arrest data, and human trafficking education and prevention efforts. He was also a member of the Maryland Center for School Safety investigative team. We welcome each of our speakers and thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing your expertise. I will now pass it on to Amanda Rodriguez to begin the presentation.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And I just want to thank everyone for attending this evening. So I wanted to get started with some basic statistics around why and how child sex trafficking shows up in the United States, and specifically here in Maryland and then in Baltimore County. And so we're going to walk through some of that this evening. And, you know, some of it is really that question of just how often does this happen? Does this really happen here? And the simple answer is it does. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children estimates that, and it changes every year, but between 1 in 5 and 1 in 7 missing children is at risk for being trafficked. And so the question is, how many children go missing in Maryland every year? The numbers range from between 10,000 to 12,000 children every year. So just in the state of Maryland, we have thousands of kids that are at risk for being trafficked. And so that alone should be a startling statistic. It should make us sit up and pay attention. This is an important issue and it is absolutely affecting our kids. Next slide, please. So this is the Maryland human trafficking law, and the next kind of thing to get your head around is what is child trafficking. For those of you that were at the first webinar, you know that human trafficking is the taking, the harboring, the transporting of a person to a place for them to engage in commercial sex. The difference in child sex trafficking is that there's a separate element that is not required, which is the force, fraud, and coercion, which is required for adult trafficking. So for adult trafficking, taking, harboring, transporting a person to a place for the purpose of them engaging in commercial sex by force, fraud, and coercion is trafficking. For children, and it's really important, force, fraud, and coercion is not required. So what does that mean in practice? Number one, that movement is not required for trafficking. Harboring does not require movement. So a child can be trafficked in their own bedroom. If you keep a child in his bedroom for the purpose of him engaging in commercial sex, you are a trafficker and he is a victim. A child engages, if a child engages in any act of commercial sex, whether that's child pornography for something of value, prostitution, or stripping, that child is a victim of human trafficking. And it's a really important distinction here, whether or not there is a trafficker. And I just want to go over that one more time because sometimes that's hard to start to unravel. So a child who engages in a commercial sex act, whether that is child pornography, prostitution, or stripping, that child is a victim of human trafficking. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no if that child was forced to do it, if that child was coerced to do it. And regardless of whether or not there is a third party receiving something of value for that sex act. And there's some really important reasons why that's the law. There's some victim advocacy, some federal laws that allow victims to get access to some victim services as a result of that. There's also questions around who can be charged as a trafficker. But in terms of seeing that child as a victim, it's important to realize that the act being committed against them is the trafficking. So a child that engages in an act of commercial sex, whether it's child pornography, prostitution, or stripping, is a victim of trafficking. Next slide, please.
So human trafficking is about vulnerability. And when we're talking about children, some of their vulnerabilities are just developmental odd and awkwardness that creates space for people to come in and take advantage of those vulnerabilities. Some other vulnerabilities statistically that pop up, that children are far more likely to be victimized is if they are in poverty, if they've had CPS direct contact with them at any point. They're more likely, depending on their home circumstances and their life, they're more likely to be victimized. But children who grow up in a two-parent household with good emotional support are also vulnerable. And we're finding that a lot of kids are meeting their potential traffickers through the internet, but also through places like schools, um, malls, any parks, places that kids congregate to. Next slide, please. So the risk factors that can make you more susceptible to the vulnerabilities and people taking advantage of them can be chronic running away, homeless youth, youth with histories of sexual abuse and assault, youths and families with substance abuse, youths with severe substance abuse issues, and youths within the child welfare system. For myself as a youth, I personally found that I met all of these vulnerabilities, and the traffickers in my life were able to recognize and take advantage of those vulnerabilities. But anyone can truly be a target, regardless of the race, socioeconomic status, parent involvement, etc. Nobody is free from the potential risk of this. Next slide. So again, like we mentioned earlier, malls, schools, metro stations, social media, group homes, homeless shelters, and social service centers are places where traffickers will often hang around and try to interact with youth. Grooming is part of the first process in a relationship between a trafficker and a youth. You have to build a relationship in order to be secure enough to know that you won't be betrayed. So you start grooming the child and you build a relationship of attention and love and sympathy. And then eventually you start isolating the victim. You make promises of taking them away from where they are and taking them to a better opportunity. You promise money and jobs, and you promise a life of luxury, and then you give just a little bit. You begin to fulfill whatever needs the child is in need of. So for my children, I always use the cell phone. If a trafficker wanted to get my children's needs met that they felt were their needs, they could use the cell phone, and my children would become vulnerable to that person. And then sex is often coinciding. So you often see young to adult people engaging in a sexual relationship with a child, because that builds that intimacy that they so desperately need. And that intimacy makes them even more vulnerable to the abuse that will begin. So eventually the trafficker will introduce you to what we call the game. It is the rules and regulations of being in the streets or being in the life. There are rules on the pimp side and there are rules on the victim side. But you have the language and the expectations beat into you, oftentimes literally. I'm 32 years old and I've been out of the game for 17 years. I still cannot look people in the eye unless I'm really comfortable with them, because that was one of the rules of the game. And it's something that psychologically I haven't been able to get over. Eventually the relationship becomes violent psychologically and physically and sexually. Um, Having worked in domestic violence and anti-trafficking, I can honestly say that the relationship that breaks down so much that it becomes a trafficking relationship is by far the most violent form of domestic violence that there is. Also, the crossover between domestic violence and trafficking is often because sex is a way to abuse people. Next slide.
So let's take a minute and talk about why children are inherently vulnerable. So I know Liz spoke about these. There are things that exist in society or exist in a child's life or exist in a person's life that may make them more vulnerable to trafficking. Things like prior sex abuse or substance abuse in the home. But children by themselves, just being kids, are inherently more vulnerable, and it's simple brain development. How old are you when you're able to legally rent a car or rent a hotel room by yourself? I remember when I got married, I was not old enough, actually. So the age is 25, and it's because that's the age that your brain stops growing, it stops developing. So one of the parts of your brain that continues to develop throughout your adolescence is that prefrontal cortex. And so this is an exercise that we do with our youth when we are, especially our trafficked youth, when we're doing both group therapy sessions and then also some of our individual therapy sessions at Turnaround. It's called the HAND model. And there's tons of videos on YouTube that can do a much better job of explaining it, because I am not a clinician. But essentially what you're looking at is you can use your hand as an example of what your brain looks like. Your palm area is your limbic area that regulates arousal and emotions, and then your hippocampus and your amygdala are regulators of things that essentially trigger when that flight, fright, or freeze, I'm always going to get that wrong, response, which is great in terms of, if your house is on fire and you just run out the door, you want that to ignite, but you also want that great prefrontal cortex to be able to regulate the thinking part of your brain, because there are going to be moments when that response, that amygdala response, is not what you want to be what's going off. You want to be able to calm down. So sometimes you want to have the thinking part working, and sometimes it's good that your trauma response, your amygdala is enacted and is awake and is telling you what to do. So essentially what happens is when you're an adult, your prefrontal cortex can come down and it can regulate that amygdala. The way that we often talk about it is, when you're a child having a nightmare, your prefrontal cortex essentially is not fully developed yet. So you're screaming, you're asking for your parent, and your parent comes in and they calm you down, which helps calm that amygdala down, because your prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. When you're an adult and your prefrontal cortex is fully developed, you flip your lid. So that prefrontal cortex goes up and you know how to bring it back down. The thing that we've known about ACEs and about trauma is that if a child is not, either if the trauma causes brain damage, so that part of the brain is not fully developed, or if a child is not taught how to calm themselves down using that prefrontal cortex, there can be all kinds of additional issues. And so we have to train them. We're going to, coax them and calm them, like when a child has a nightmare. But we have to make sure, so even the simple things that we're able to brush aside as a person who has not experienced trauma, a child who has struggled with that is going to struggle their entire life. And so we hear a lot about youth acting out. a lot of this could be as a result of trauma. So brain development in itself is a vulnerability because of things like that, about the way that we simply don't know how to regulate it. We can't regulate those emotions. Next slide, please. So moving into some kind of specialized areas of trafficking, if you look or if you follow some of the news around trafficking, this doesn't come up a lot, but unfortunately it does happen quite a bit around the state. Familial trafficking is a real problem here in Baltimore County, although there have not been a ton of cases, like I said, that have hit necessarily the news. And it's an unfortunate reality. Children are sold for drugs, for rent, and for money by family members. Unfortunately, the way that familial trafficking looks is that a child will be, will be sold by their, let's say, grandparent, aunt, uncle, father, mother, in order to meet some basic needs, or to meet, needs around drugs or substance abuse. And the child will feel the connection to the abuser, similar to a child who's experiencing sexual violence at home. So they may feel guilt about going to anyone for assistance because they're scared that it's going to happen to a sibling, or they're scared that it, that we're not scared, but they have a real fear that they are, or a real feeling that they're assisting with their family needs. And so it's a really difficult type of trafficking to identify because of the connection to the family. This isn't something that's necessarily out in the community, and it can often mimic or mirror child sexual abuse. Next slide, please. I also wanted to mention briefly male victims of trafficking. We often, when we see pictures of trafficking victims, the person that's being depicted is a female, but we do know there's been a couple of studies that indicate that male victims are both at risk for being trafficked. In some studies, as much as 50% of trafficking victims are male. The numbers are all over the place with trafficking statistics, though, so we're not really sure how accurate that is. The relationship between a male victim and his or her or his trafficker may vary from a traditional pimp and victim dynamic. It may often look less like pimp control and more like a family unit, based on some of the information that we have from some of the studies that have come out, and some of the victims that we've served at Turnaround. The other thing that is really difficult with male trafficking victims, both coming out of the life and seeking out services, is that there are a lot of fear around the shame and stigma. Male victims are often trafficked when they're younger. They are at times confused over their sexual orientation when they are coming out of the life, and they often, are taught, society teaches them that they should enjoy sex. And so there's a lot of confusion about what happened to them and what their experience going forward, especially what healthy sexual relationships should be. Next slide, please.
So we have a lot of research that shows that LGBTQIA youth are at a high risk of child sex trafficking as well as adult trafficking. They are not inherently vulnerable, but they have a high rate of families and friends, and basically their whole community oftentimes don't support their identities. And so the LGBTQIA youth are at risk because of a lack of acceptance, a lack of stable housing if their parents kick them out after coming out, higher rates of homelessness, less likely to be reported as missing, a history of abuse, and survival. And survival sex in and of itself is a form of trafficking, especially, as a child. In order to survive and using sex as a way to do so, you're gaining some sort of um, monetary value for exchange of that sex. And so there doesn't need to be pimp control in order for that to exist. And therefore the LGBTQIA youth that are being trafficked by needing, basically the buyer becomes the trafficker by exchanging sex with something of value. Um, as a mother and a mother of a child who identifies as non-binary and queer, um, I see the vulnerabilities so clearly now. Um, and I think that every time I I think to myself, okay, am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? As long as my children never feel less than for being who they are, I think I'm doing okay. And I think a lot of parents can say that. Um, Next slide, please. So the pimp game, to get back to pimp control, because that is a huge uh, thing that we see within trafficking of children. Um, there's a whole subculture that is literally written in a manual, and part of that manual is it's called the Pimp Game. You can buy it on Amazon. um it has step-by-step directions on how to take a vulnerable child or young adult and how to have a relationship with that person, how to build up their um their sorry, my words are slipping here, how to build up their confidence, and then little by little take it back. And so you'll start to dress her, think for her, own her. If you and your victim are sexually active, slow it down. After sex, take her shopping for one item. Hair and or nails is fine. She'll develop a feeling of accomplishment. The shopping after a month will be replaced with cash. The lovemaking turns to raw sex. She'll start to crave intimacy and be willing to get back into your good graces. After you've broken her spirit, she has no sense of self-value. Now, pimp, put a price tag on the item you have manufactured. I can say with certainty that that is exactly how my relationship with my pimp occurred. And when you, as a survivor, when you look back on that time later and you realize that what you thought was love at one point was really literally a manual on a relationship, it really changes how you feel about, that situation. Um, Next slide, please.
So
So, oh, which one of us was doing this?
I think I was, Liz, but if you
Okay.
want to take it, you can.
Okay. So traffickers' methods of control, threats against the victim or victim's family. So traffickers will, once they have you in this abusive relationship that they've created via the manual, they start to threaten more from you in order to get you to be so low that you'll agree to have sex for money. So they start to threaten your family. They take your identification. They change your appearance. They know where your mom lives. They will begin to use those things as threats against you to get you to do what they want. They'll physically and sexually abuse you. They'll isolate you from your family. Um, I was in a hotel in College Park, right near the University of Maryland, for 6 weeks, and my house was 2 blocks away, and nobody could find me. Um, they'll seize and destroy your documents. So I'm pretty sure that my original social security card is still somewhere out there with my pimp. I've never been able to retrieve it. prevent trafficked person from earning enough to pay off debt, keep adding charges to debt. So this can be in any trafficking relationship. They can give you a number, but most relationships with a pimp control situation, you more or less have a quota for the day. So you charge a certain amount for each interaction, and so you know that you have however that much to make for the day, or else you're going home and you're facing abuse. A lot of pimps and traffickers will start you on a drug or an alcohol dependency. My first trafficker utilized cocaine. My second trafficker was actually born from a pimp relationship. His mother and his father were longtime partners, and his mother had died from a heroin overdose. And so he actually saved my life by not allowing me to continue doing drugs. Make a victim think that he or she will be arrested if they leave the situation. Oftentimes that's true. Victims are often picked up by the police doing sweeps, and they, your pimp or your trafficker really nails in on how you will face criminal charges and how he's not doing anything illegal, and that you are the only one that's doing something illegal. So you keep your mouth shut, and if you don't, there will be problems. So psychological abuse and manipulation, including tactics to create dependency. Again, that goes back to that domestic violence relationship that's built, or a boss and employee relationship that's built. However it's built and whatever it looks like, it's something that's trauma bonded. And then they'll use shame and self-blame against the victims. So before you know it, you're out there and you're working, and one day they call you a whore and you're like, well, I'm not that. And they go, no, you are. And that further pushes the stigma and the self-blame and the realization that you are doing something illegal and you are at risk of being arrested, and you do everything in your power to not hurt your abuser. Their life is your life. Their survival is your survival. Next slide.
So trauma bonding and Stockholm syndrome are pretty synonymous. Trauma bonding is a newer terminology for the syndrome that I'm sure many of you have heard about, especially in relation to kidnapping. When I talk about trauma bonding, the way that I equate it for folks that are not as familiar with psychological terminology is I bring up the movie Beauty and the Beast. And I train law enforcement a lot. And so I use this when I train law enforcement, because it is a way of getting to really getting an understanding of what it's like from the survivor's perspective. So all of you, I'm sure, have seen the movie Beauty and the Beast, and if you think about it in terms of what it would have to take for a beautiful young woman who, clearly has some prior trauma history. She has her mother is missing, at least in the cartoon version. We have no idea why that is. She has this kind of abusive boyfriend back at home. Her father goes missing. She finds him in jail with this hideous monster, this vicious monster who has jailed him. And then 10 minutes later, she's literally singing with a plate and a spoon. And so that essentially is trauma bonding. This idea that you can start to humanize your abuser. And you will do this through different methods. So one will be, as I said, humanizing. One will be starting to become overly appreciative for small acts of kindness. You'll start to blame yourself for the abuse that's happening against you, and internalize that abuse. The other thing that's really interesting with that movie, and I'm sorry if I'm ruining it for you for the next time that you see it, or maybe I'm making it better, is that, the part in the movie where he sends her away. And so when you think about trauma bonding and what that means to a survivor, those trauma bonds are really, really hard to break. This is, as you know, we've spoken about before, a survivor believes him or herself to have an emotional connection to their abuser. They believe themselves to be in love, that this person loves them back. And oftentimes they've come from, you know, as Liz said, maybe a broken home or from prior instances of abuse that have led them to have vulnerabilities. And this person has filled those gaps in their lives and have made them whole. And so that connection that is very, very strong. And it's from the perspective of that survivor. And so the trafficker, it's much easier to be a non-emotional party, it's different than domestic violence. It's this non-emotional party with a survivor who's really all in. And so you add this trauma bond, right? This connection, this humanizing of this abuser. And in the movie, the beast does what? He gives her a mirror. So every time that she wants to see him, she can. And she does what? She comes back, just as we would expect a victim who has trauma bonds to do. And so trauma bonding, it's a real and powerful thing. It is a method of survival. And so oftentimes we ask the wrong question when we ask, why does she stay? Or why does he stay with this abuser? Why didn't this person run away from this horrible trafficking situation? I've had so many instances where people will ask, well, you were in a hotel room next to a phone for all this time. Why didn't you just call your family? Or why didn't you just run out the door? Some of it may be fear of the trafficker who's standing outside and the abuse that you can incur, but some of it is literally just that trauma bond is that strong that it will keep you in that room and it will keep you coming back because of that psychological connection of survival that you've formed with this other person. Next slide, please. So one of the most important things about child sex trafficking, and I'm going to take us back to the beginning, is around language. So we've identified that it's a significant problem in Maryland. It's a significant problem in Baltimore County. There's some awesome people that are working on this issue. The thing, though, is that we have to make sure that we are talking about it in the right way and we are using the right language, because it absolutely makes a difference. And I'm going to show you a really simple exercise that you can use with your friends when you're talking about awareness on this issue, so that you can help them understand why this is such an important topic and why language is so important. So I want you to be real with yourself. I want you to think about the words teenage prostitute. I want you to think about who you picture, what they're wearing, what society thinks about them, how they act, how they're depicted in movies. It's probably a pretty negative image. It's probably someone that is sassy. There's probably lots of negative terminology that is used. There's probably even curse words that come to mind that people use to describe that person. And then there's another, so I want you to just live with that image for just a minute, with that person. But there's a flip side. Liz, do you want to jump in?
Yeah. The flip side to using that language is the barrier we face in not only recognizing victims, but just viewing them for who they are. And when we're talking about the ones we're talking about tonight, oftentimes, they're children. And I don't think you have to be a parent or have constant contact with children to have empathy for any kind of harm that children come to. But oftentimes society uses incorrect or vulgar terms for children who have been trafficked, and child prostitute is the nicest of them. But unless we're looking at them as children and looking at them as people who have had terrible things happen to them, we're not going to do a whole lot of good in trying to prevent the terrible things. So when we're talking
Absolutely.
about victims of trafficking and we're talking about children, using survivor, using child victim, using abused child, it gives the empathy back to the victim instead of being called the terrible things that society often does call them.
Absolutely. I think that, and it's as simple as using the terminology child sex trafficking victim and comparing that to who you picture, standing that person next to teenage prostitute. Because the reality is it's the same person. There is no such thing as a teenage prostitute. The other thing that it does that's really significant in this conversation, if you think about it and you're honest with yourself, is it really takes away that choice. So teenage prostitute, we seem to give an enormous amount of autonomy to. But child sex trafficking, we're asking the question, and it's the correct question. We stop asking what's wrong with you or what did you do, and we start asking what happened to you. And that's the question that we need to be asking when we're talking about these kids. Next slide, please. So just to wrap up, there is no such thing as a child prostitute. That person does not exist. Every child that is engaging or is forced to engage in, or, well, I'll be as simple as every child that is engaging in pornography, child pornography, if there's something of value exchange, stripping, or an act of prostitution, commercial sex, is a child sex trafficking victim. And we have to get the terminology correct in our heads because we have to stop the stigma. Every teenager who engages in acts of prostitution is a child sex trafficking victim. That's all the way up to the age of 17. They are a vulnerable child, a child who fell through the cracks. And I'm really proud to say that in Baltimore County, we are doing lots of really great work to fix this. There's a new program that just started in the last couple of months called the Regional Navigator Program, with amazing partners, some of which you're going to hear from tonight, many of whom are a part of the Baltimore County Working Group on Human Trafficking, Child Advocacy Center, Department of Social Services, State Attorney's Office, the Police Department, the school system, GBMC, and the agency that I work for, Turnaround, which is our Rape Crisis Center. And we're working to identify and to support human trafficking victims, child human trafficking victims here in Baltimore County. We're also hoping to ensure that high-risk youth and children have access to services right away so that we're not waiting until they become a victim until we can do something. So we're really excited to be a part of this project, and we are really thankful for the leadership of the county as we move forward on this project. So thank you so much for your time this evening. I know that there are questions. We're so excited to answer them. And we're, again, just really appreciative of the amazing support of the county in terms of working with human trafficking survivors.
Thank you so much, Amanda and Liz. And now we're going to pass it on to Michelle to begin her portion of the presentation.
Great, thank you, Ashley. I'm Michelle Delovich, and I work at the Child Advocacy Center, like we said before. And this slide is essentially an overview of the evolution of child abuse investigations from the 80s until now. So disclosing abuse and reliving traumatic events through disclosure can really result in further trauma for kids and be inflicted by even the most sensitive and well-meaning professionals. When children would report abuse, they would tell school or tell a family member, then the police were called, they would have to talk to them, then they'd have to talk to doctors, nurses, child protection, a lawyer, they're talking to their counselor. And I mean, it's really a lot of times that they've had to retell their story. Baltimore County Child Advocacy Center has been using this model since the 1980s, what's on the right side of your screen, where essentially the child or the youth are report abuse. They come to our agency and are able to talk to a social worker, and the information is communicated by all parties to all parties so that the child doesn't have to continue to talk about the narrative of the traumatic abuse. We can focus on healing and safety. So we really provide a full spectrum of services through the investigation, court advocacy, therapy, and medical care. Next slide. So the Baltimore County CAC we're essentially a multidisciplinary team, and we're all co-located in mostly. So the center is set up to be child and teenage friendly. And the child protective service workers are master's level social workers, but they're also trained in forensic interviewing, which is a legally sound way to talk to kids and youth about child sex abuse, physical abuse, witnesses to violence, and sex trafficking in a way that does not re-traumatize them during the disclosure, the interview. And we have the role of child safety in child protective services. And we are also co-located with the Baltimore County Police Crimes Against Children Unit, and they are specially trained detectives who handle the child sex abuse cases, child pornography, and internet crimes. Missing and Exploited Children Unit is located there, and also physical abuse. But our CPS social workers also partner with detectives and agents from Baltimore County Police Vice Squad, Maryland State Police, the FBI, and Homeland Security in child sex trafficking investigations. And our Baltimore County State's Attorney, although they're off-site, they have a specialized sex crimes division and a specialized attorneys that prosecute child trafficking cases. We have in-house victim advocacy and trauma-trained mental health providers on site, and Spanish-speaking interpretation, and our medical capabilities are on site as well. But during COVID-19 pandemic, all our non-emergency and emergency cases have been seen at GBMC Safe Suite, which is an amazing program that we work with closely. Next slide. So I just want to let you know that there is no wrong door to report concerns about child sex trafficking, whether it's the police, the Department of Social Services, which that's the way we get to the Child Advocacy Center, my unit, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. We've all been doing this for a while, and our communication is very strong. So we want all partners to be involved. But if you do call Baltimore County Department of Social Services to report something that you're concerned about, you will be talked to a master's level social worker at the screening level. report your concerns as soon as possible. You can report anonymously, but if you do leave your name and your contact and never report it to the family or the maltreater. And if you want to be anonymous when you report, it is still helpful if you could leave a number or an email, because it could be invaluable to the investigation to clarify information and ask follow-up questions. Next slide. So some of the do's and don'ts of reporting. If you think you need to make a report, do it as soon as possible. Like I said, confirming child maltreatment proves more difficult. And it can impact our ability really to help to keep youth safe. If you're obtaining information from a youth, listen to them, but don't ask for too many details. Remember, we want to decrease the amount of times that they have to relive the traumatic event or events. We do want as much information as possible, but you don't have to have proof or investigate it yourself. And sex abuse and child sex trafficking persist in shame and fear and isolation. So believe the child, give them a voice, and be a supportive person in their life. Next slide. So here's some of the information you'll be asked when making a report, and their information, their age, their address, if you know anything about the alleged abuser or trafficker, where it happened. Jurisdiction's important, but even if we don't now, we're still, if the child is in our jurisdiction, they're our responsibility. Where they are, their relationship, what specifically happened. But if you're missing some of the pieces, that's okay. We'll work to put the pieces together. I mean, you really don't even have to know a name. You should just report what you're concerned about. And we have a mandate on child safety, and we take it really seriously when we're receiving a report. They work really hard behind the scenes to find out what's going on and find out who people are. Next slide. So a little bit about mandated reporting. People in health, law enforcement, educators, human service workers, we're mandated reporters. Our license depend on it. And we're a lot of the times getting most of the information because we're in contact with a lot of people, but a good deal of reports come from the community. So there is no penalty for reporting something in good faith. And again, proof is not needed. Sex trafficking and sex abuse are responded to within 24 hours or immediately if the youth is in the care of the alleged trafficker or the alleged maltreater if it's a sexual abuse case. And we continue risk and safety assessments throughout our intervention. If a child is in danger and it can't be addressed through planning with the family, we do have the authority to place the children in out-of-home care. Next slide. So this is just a general overview of just taking the reports. We're going to assign our cases immediately. We want to address child safety immediately and medical attention if needed, but we'll interview the victim. We'll interview all the children that are in the care of the parent or the alleged trafficker, or we're interviewing everybody. But we always need, sometimes arrest can be made quickly, but sometimes it takes a while to build a case. So we're meeting with our MDT and to staff it and review what's going on. If they need more information for prosecution purposes, that's the time where we can talk about it. If we want to talk about special therapeutic interventions that need to be explored, that is the place to do it. We want to take care and with every child that comes through our advocacy center to make sure that they're getting all the services that they need for safety and well-being. And then also now we're partnering as part of the Regional Navigator program to have case staffings with child sex trafficking cases. Next slide. So this is, a really important, we have a risk of harm response. It does not have to be, we don't have to have evidence of trafficking, but if folks have suspicion, please call us and we can open a specialized case called a risk of harm. And essentially, we want to engage the youth and families when there's a concern for trafficking. A youth may run away with unexplained money and come back with unexplained money or new clothes. The people in their life may be concerned about an older boyfriend or hotel stays, new tattoos, or information that they posted online. And we'll partner with the police, but essentially we're meeting with the youth for an assessment and in a more clinical way. And if we learn that they're involved in trafficking, we can certainly open an investigation and work with the police in that way. But if the child isn't ready to report anything yet, but they're at a high risk or vulnerable to be recruited, we're going to partner with their family or caregivers and provide services to address the risk. So this could include anything from education about risk factors and or financial assistance, education support, respite services, connection with trauma-informed therapy, and anti-trafficking case management. Next slide. And so this is just an overview of, if anyone's familiar with CPS, an overview of our services where we're addressing risks, certainly, and I know we're going a little farther on time. So the one thing that I did want to point out is that, we do, if there's no familial trafficking, obviously, and children can stay in their home safely, then we're going to provide clinical case management through in-home services and advocacy and support that way. And then there are times where children need to be kept safe from pimps and traffickers, and or their family of origin is not going to be, it's not a safe environment, and it does require out-of-home placement. And we have a couple of specialized placements in the area that address, that do have anti-trafficking case management as well. So, and then next slide. And this is our doctrine at the Baltimore County CAC. It's our guiding principle. If we're ever in doubt about while we're making a decision, we as a team bring ourselves back to this doctrine, that the child's our first priority, not the needs of the family, not what the child's story, not the evidence, not what the court needs, not what the police need or child protective services or the attorneys. It's the child. And then next slide. And Ashley, I don't know, I know we're a little over time. So if we've kind of had some examples already, I didn't know if you wanted me to continue in that way.
Actually, go ahead and start with the Q&A, and then if we have time at the end, we can come back to that. Does that work for you?
Perfect. Thank
Okay,
you.
great. Of course. Okay, so thank you so much, Amanda, Liz, and Michelle, for the presentations. They were excellent. I'm going to briefly discuss the national and local resources, and then we will begin the Q&A segment. We will try to get through as many questions as possible tonight. So to start with the national resources, the National Human Trafficking Hotline is the #1 resource that I would recommend to anyone with any kind of trafficking related concerns. They are available 24 hours a day by phone, text, or online chat, and they are completely confidential. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is also a great resource to report tips, and this can be done by calling 1-800-THE-LOST, and that's 800-843-5678, or by visiting them at cybertipline.org. This slide shows the local resources available in Baltimore County. If you are outside of Baltimore County, I would recommend calling the national hotline or visiting them online to access a list of your local resources. So in Baltimore County and pretty much anywhere, in case of any emergency, always call 911. For non-emergencies and to report tips, you can email iwatch@baltimorecountymd.gov. To report child abuse and suspicions of child trafficking, in Baltimore County, call 410-887-TIME, and that's 887-8463. Turnaround is a great comprehensive resource in Baltimore County and Baltimore City for victims of all ages. All services are available at no cost to the survivor. They have a 24-hour helpline and a text line, which is shown on your screen. And you can also visit them online at turnaroundinc.org for more information. The Maryland Center for School Safety has a tip line, which is anonymous. They can be accessed by calling 833-MD-BE-SAFE or by visiting safeschoolsmd.org. And lastly, GBMC offers healthcare services for victims of human trafficking. Medical forensic exams, also called SAFE exams, are available 24/7 at no cost to the patient. You can call or visit them online at gbmc.org/safe for more information. I would now like to begin the Q&A segment. Again, if we are unable to answer your question tonight, we do apologize, but we will include in a future webinar. We are going to start off the Q&A with a question for Dr. Ford, who again is joining us as a Q&A panelist and is the manager of school safety with the Baltimore County Public School System. So Dr. Ford, the first question is, what changes have been made to protect at-risk kids while they're learning virtually?
Good evening, everyone. So as you're aware, the pandemic has really changed the way we're currently educating our kids. And in Baltimore County, we are still all virtual as we plan on returning some kids back to in-person training, in-person education. So over this last year, we've had to learn ways to monitor kids learning at home for numerous reasons, as well as keep them safe from individuals barging into what we deem as school or classroom educational settings and disrupting that. So there are some IT protocols in place where teachers know their roster of who's exactly in their classroom at a certain time. They take roll in attendance. From time to time, if you have a student who might think it's funny and share a link with another friend in a different school, the teacher has the ability to cut that person off from that class session just to boot them out. But then that information is shared between the safety managers and, if need be, local law enforcement to look into it if it's something egregious. The other part of that is just general education, sharing with parents on things that they can do within the confines of their home to protect their children. One of the things I had to learn the hard way, and I grew up as an avid video game player. Not to date myself, but I grew up playing Pong and then Atari, and you know where we are now with the PS5s and Xboxes. The game systems are incredible. So I noticed a few years ago when my daughter was on playing that she had activated the chat. And I was hearing some of the language that was going on in the chat, and it really blew my mind, and made me think that, wow, here I am, the job that I do, the things that I teach, and right here in front of me, the language that was being used was totally inappropriate. So it got me to thinking that, you know, a lot of parents are thinking that if the child is in the home, in the confines, you know, with the parents around, that they're not in harm's way. And nothing could be further from the truth. So as a parent, guardian, older sibling, you have to actually monitor those video game systems, those chat rooms, the apps that kids using on phones, all of that in your home, you're responsible for. So between that and then what we do and on the school end, um, is what we can do jointly to protect our at-risk youth and all youth.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ford. The next question is for Liz, and the question is, what would be some suggestions regarding how to talk to our kids about human trafficking and at what age to begin?
So, as a mother, and a survivor who was working in the anti-trafficking field, I was utilizing curriculums that help support healthy sexual relationships for survivors after trafficking or any kind of sexual abuse. And in doing that work, it gave me the language needed to talk to my own children. Um, so honestly, the best place to start is when we tell our children about safe touch and about strangers not being allowed to touch us, or only mommy and daddy and your doctor can see your privates and things like that. um we we were just really comfortable talking to our children about healthy sexual things depending on their ages. But it was really when my daughter started reading that I had to start talking to her about sex trafficking, because she was reading material that I had in the house. I had a People magazine article framed by an employer that I had been in, and she read the article on the wall. So that was a she was about 5 years old, and we had to start talking about it and talking about what it meant. And really the best advice I can give is know your child's capacity for information and what they can handle at their age and their maturity level, and start talking about how we conduct our lives and what's okay and what's not okay. And consent is really important at a very early age. The conversation has evolved now over the years to a pretty frank discussion about the topics, but I know that my children have a capacity that not some other children have. So we still talk about not talking about our friends unless it's to say these are the dangers of trafficking, but to, never, we don't want to be inappropriate. But children talk to each other. And so you have to consider that the information you give your child is what goes out into the world. It doesn't end with your child. So make sure that when you are talking to your kids, you're being truthful, because when they repeat that information, we don't want children telling other children false things and then that coming back on us. Um, so when I talk to my kids, we talk about, is this discussion something that's okay to talk about with other people or not? And if you are going to discuss it, do so in the right manner. Um, and to be honest, the conversation will continue to evolve for the next few years, and it'll be my responsibility to give the correct information. And if you're a parent who's looking for that correct information, um, unfortunately there isn't a lot of public material available, but asking your local human trafficking networks for information is a great way to start. Watching these webinars are a great way to start. And then just talking to your kids about healthy sex is a great way to start.
Thank you, Liz. We're going to go back to Dr. Ford for our next question. We had a lot of questions that were directed towards the school system. So Dr. Ford, this is a two-part question. How do school staff identify, report, and support? How should school nurses handle a situation of suspected trafficking?
Okay, so I want everybody to think back to some of the things that Michelle talked about. If you remember the picture of the two schoolhouses or the two buildings and all of the steps in between. What we try to do in the school system is minimize the contact of folks questioning kids that are suspected of being involved in human trafficking. So what we're doing now is currently we're training our teachers to recognize some of the warning signs. And I think all of the speakers tonight have touched on what some of those things might look like. A change in attitude, a change in dress, a change in language, just things out of the normal, isolated, being secretive with their phone. These are little cues that what we want our classroom teachers, our cafeteria workers, our custodians to be able to do is just recognize, our bus drivers to recognize some signs that a child might be in some kind of stress and trauma. That's solely their purpose. Their purpose is not to ask, hey, what's going on? Are you being trafficked? We don't teach to ask those questions. What they then will do is elevate their concern to the next level. And the next level is a team made up of the school nurse, the pupil personnel worker, the principal or assistant principal, and the SRO, which is the school resource officers. Those individuals and maybe one or two others are trained in a higher level of how to deal with suspected human trafficking or child abuse cases. From that point, I want you to think back to Michelle's pictures again. And that's when we get the different agencies involved. We get, you heard Michelle mention the CACU, which is the Crimes Against Children's Unit, and some other specialized law enforcement units, as well as some of the local service providers. So once we see those warning signs, we elevate it. And from that point, we remove ourselves because we want the experts to come in. We want to minimize re-victimizing that child by asking a whole bunch of questions. So on one of her pictures, you saw on the left side, I believe you saw everybody interviewing one by one, but on the right side, there was a picture of people on like a TV screen, like multiple agency folks. So you have one person in the room interviewing the person, but other folks that need that information, it's readily available to them. So that way you're not re-victimizing that child over and over again. The biggest thing we're working on, and that's why I'm so glad that we have this new Navigator program starting up, is that in the past, Baltimore County at times can have a very transient population. So typically if a family is in some kind of trouble, rather it be the parents or the child, they'll pick up and just move. Sometimes it's out of county, sometimes it's just to the other side of the county. So there was a time when we would lose children, or a child would be on the west side and then magically appear enrolling in a school on the east side, and that history didn't travel with that child. So we're hoping and able to provide better services and making sure that once the experts come up with this treatment plan, this care plan for that child, is that the information is now shared back with not everybody in the school, but your counselor, your PPW, your SRO, so they can help monitor that child in the school. And then that child also has a friendly face and a resource that they now can reach out to in their new environment if they're struggling. I hope that answers that question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ford. This next question is going to be for Amanda. What support services regarding education are there for child sex trafficking survivors?
Thank you, Ashley, and it's a great question. So there's a couple of answers to this, and I can go down either path, and so I'll go down both. So the one side of it is not easy. The one side of it is education. So Turnaround provides throughout the county prevention education, and I know Liz mentioned this a little bit. Dr. Ford mentioned it in some of his remarks, and so Turnaround provides prevention education related to trafficking. So support services related to education would be those prevention education activities. We currently utilize evidence-based modeled prevention education. It's called My Life, My Choice. It's based out of Boston, in group homes throughout the county. And we're hoping to be able to expand that post-COVID once we get back into schools and some other, places that we can actually meet and gather in person. The other things that we actively do is, to Liz's point, we provide pre-K, K, and up with healthy relationships and healthy sexuality education. In terms of support services beyond just those education pieces, we didn't talk a lot about the victim service side of this, but survivors need everything from counseling services, case management services, legal services. I know Michelle mentioned lots of services that come through as a result of the Child Advocacy Center, medical services, forensic interviewing. And so there's a huge amount of need in terms of serving this population. So we talk about support services and education. It's really two different things, although they're connected to each other. So I hope that answers the way that the person who asked the question wanted it to be answered.
Thank you, Amanda. All right, we're going back to Dr. Ford. So many school safety questions. Dr. Ford, what is the risk for elementary aged students? Is this an area of concern?
So I once again, referring back to all of the speakers tonight, every age is a concern. Every child is a concern. I think the younger age children are more a concern of family members, or as Amanda said, familial trafficking, where once you get into that middle school, high school, it might change a little bit as far as what kind of trafficking you see. For me, my focus right now would be, so we know sixth graders, that middle school age is when the adolescence hit. They're going through changes. And then in high school, it's a self-gratification, what can you buy me? I want the latest fashion things. So they're a little bit easier of a target, if you will, for trafficking, and in a way most outsiders think about trafficking. But in general, we provide training from elementary to high school because we want to make sure that we're protecting all of our kids.
Thank you. The next question is for Michelle. Michelle, how can we teach our children about this without scaring them? We need help keeping them safe without being helicopter parents, which I think is a great question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when we're talking to our kids, and there is, this is a scary topic, but ourselves putting the pause in before really talking to them. So not having our own fear about all the possibilities come in, but really, taking a moment to pause and center before starting to talk to them, and not going into worst case scenario. I think that what Liz talked about, just where the conversation starts, early about what are the private parts of the body, what touch is okay and not okay, and then that conversation kind of continues and grows. in, quiet, calm moments with kids and teenagers, and just building, building a relationship with communication, with open communication, and talking about the kind of apps that they're on and what they're learning, and then I think you'll see that, the kids will come and talk to you about just different things that they've saw or heard in school, and then starting the conversation there. But I really think that, kind of centering ourselves and putting it in child-friendly language can go a long way to keeping the conversation going with our kids.
Thank you, Michelle. All right, back to Dr. Ford. And this is going to be a few questions in one just to kind of save on time. Are you ready, Dr. Ford?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the questions are teachers and or school resource officers trained about human trafficking as part of their annual training? Is this being discussed enough in the schools? And does sex education include human trafficking? And if so, if human trafficking training is going to be presented, will parents have to be notified before this information is presented in the school system? And I apologize in advance for all of those questions at once.
All right, so let me know if I miss anything. So let's start with the SROs. If you didn't know, SROs are a group of some of the most trained police officers you will ever encounter. They definitely receive the most training when it comes to dealing with youth. So yes, the SROs get that in their professional development yearly from Baltimore County Police, but they also get some of it through Baltimore County Public Schools. Teachers, there are about 8 units now that teachers can go to in our professional development hub and educate or re-educate themselves on some of the nuances of human trafficking. We also, and this is right before the ransomware hit, we had a 4.5-hour online training for all of our teachers planned to go over what the protocols are and will be as far as reporting, warning signs, just going over some of those things that we've touched on before. We have new staff, we have staff that need retraining, and also there's the new wrinkle of the Navigator program, which is going to work wonders for the school system, because we'll have that direct point of contact as far as helping us navigate the waters. The other part of that question was?
Does sex education include human trafficking?
Yes. So for our high schoolers, it comes in under the health curriculum, and that's been there for, I want to say, a few years. Back in 2020, MSDE came out with new guidance for middle schools. I believe most of the 24 LEAs, which are your local educational agencies, your 24 public counties, I believe everybody is currently working on revamping their middle school health curriculum, which at that point will include some subject matter on human trafficking. I believe in Baltimore County, once that is close to being finalized, parents will get information on it, and it might even include an opt-out clause. I'm not sure about that yet. But yes, currently right now, high schoolers do get, under the health curriculum, they do get some information and training about human trafficking.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So it looks like it is just 1 minute until we're going to close. I think we have time for one more question, and I'm going to give this to Amanda because I think this is a very important question for our viewers. What should I do if I suspect someone is trying to recruit my child?
No pressure, right? Like last question and that one. So when I think about this question, I think the first thing, and this is the thing that I tell any survivor of abuse, when we start working with them, the thing that's going to keep you safe is your gut. And so if you believe that something is going on with your child, if you believe that your child is being recruited, the first thing I would say is trust your gut. I think that there is something inherently that happens where we try not to intervene, or we try to kind of separate ourselves from a situation. And that can create harm. This, as Liz said in the presentation, this can happen to anybody. And so you want your antenna up. That is a healthy place for it to be. Not that you're going to be hyper vigilant, but that you are going to have your antenna up now that you've had this or seen this presentation. The other thing the other point that I wanted to make on this issue is the place where you can stop this and really stop it is at the grooming stage. And so this came up again during the presentation that Liz and I did, and I've actually heard survivors say this: when it gets to the point that someone is trafficked, those trauma bonds have already been formed. So it may be too late for you to intervene. And there's a whole other presentation that I could give about kind of when, what that looks like, that cycle of abuse looks like. But for a survivor, that grooming time is so valuable and a point in which you really can intervene. So if you believe that your child is being recruited, you want to look for things like Liz said about the cell phone, or is there a relationship that's happening that's becoming unhealthy or abusive? Are there indications that there are things happening to your child? Are they showing up with new things that they shouldn't have access to? Are they having their nails done, their hair done, where they really shouldn't have access to those things? You're not sure how they're getting access to those things. The other side is, we know with child sexual abuse or child abuse, what you may start to see is children withdrawing, children's grades going down. So other things to look out for, but you want to really pay attention, because that grooming stage is just vital to keeping children safe. I think the other, and this has been brought up a couple of times, and I'll talk super fast, is keeping honesty and communication with your adolescents and with your young people. So we know that kids are targeted as young as middle school for trafficking. And I think that it is important for you to be having conversations about all the things we talked about before: healthy relationships, healthy touch, throughout their growth years, because you want to be able to then have those conversations at the point in which they are going to be targeted potentially by traffickers. And I think that if there are moments where, you can step in and say, hey, something is going on before the incident has happened, and you have enough of a relationship with your child that you can do that, that is going to keep them safe. I think the knee-jerk reaction is going to be obviously to throw the cell phone in the toilet and send them to their aunts, and their aunt lives in Maine. The reality is, if the trauma bond has been formed, they're going to find a way back to each other. And so you want to try to nip it in the bud as early as you possibly can. And also to make sure that you're, and this is a really important point too, and it's something that came up time and time again with every survivor that I have served, that we've been able to have this type of conversation, is if your child is trafficked, the way that you can stop that, it's a statistic that children get back into a cycle, or individuals who are trafficked have a likelihood of being re-traumatized 7 times, getting back into life 7 times. That's the average. The way that you can stop it is to build a community and safety around them. And so if they feel like they can come back to you, that's a less likelihood of that happening again. And so I feel like, even if you feel like your child is being recruited, you need to talk to them about it. You need to not be scared about it. You need to talk to them, have an honest communication, honest conversation about it. On the other side though, if it's already happening, your door needs to be open when they want to come home. And you need to leave the stigma at the door and make sure that child is brought back into your home and accepted, because that's how you're going to stop it from happening again.
Thanks, Amanda. So we are all finished with the Q&A. We do apologize if your question was not answered. We will absolutely include any questions that we were not able to answer in our panel webinar on April 27th. Thank you so much to Amanda, Liz, Michelle, Dr. Ford, and Chief Hyatt for the remarks, and also to everyone for attending this webinar. We hope that you learned a lot. Hope that you join us for our future webinars. especially the expert panel webinar that will take place in April. We'll get all of your questions answered. And this concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for joining.